I'm so glad you all turned out tonight. This is a great program. It's a great story, and you're going to find out a great Minnesota connection here. But to lead this tonight is Mr. Brooks Berg. Where is Brooks? There he is. Brooks has one problem.
One.
Oh, Linda's got others, but,
Yeah.
But anyway, he's a Navy guy.
Yeah.
Go Army.
Beat Army. Here we go. Thank you, Don. This is year 39, Don. It's just amazing. You've created this child of yours that has infinite life. And just all these people have come here tonight for another one of your programs is really cool. I was listening to Don talk yesterday and today. He has contact with over 16 of these roundtables around the country. And so there's 16 other organizations almost as good as this one that are covering our favorite topics that is important for America today. So Don, that's your legacy. Really cool. I'm proud to know you, and well done. I can't wait to get to tonight's program. Go Navies. There'll be pictures tonight for the Army guys, so it's important to know. General Nash, I apologize for that remark. Anyways, tonight's going to be a little bit different. We're going to have a featured author, and I'll talk about it in a minute, and then we'll have a local person who's in leadership with the Dan Patch organization in Savage, Minnesota. So there'll be two different segments, and then we'll go to Q&A after that. At this time, I'd like to introduce our featured author, Doug Most from the East Coast. Doug was born and raised in Rhode Island, the island state or the ocean state, way out there on the East Coast. He was a journalist and an author traveling up and down the coast for many years. He worked at a small paper in Bergen, New Jersey, where he covered a tragic story that gained national attention. But it was his defining moment that, yes, I'm going to be a really good journalist. And when you get those moments, he was able to focus on that. And it's that type of focus and intensity and passion that yielded 3 books, of which we get his 3rd book. The first about World War II, and it's going to be, I always say blockbuster, and I won't say it again, but I just did. So it's a really good book. I've been reading it, and it's just your first person attributes in there are great. Doug also worked in the Boston Globe for 16 years, where he was doing fabulous things there. I think he was the editor. He's currently at Boston University, where he is an assistant vice president and a editor-in-chief of some of their written things that they produce. And we're happy to have him tonight. So, Mr. Doug Most, everyone, welcome.
Thanks.
Thank you, Doug.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, have fun.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. So thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm thrilled to be here. I came from Boston, where if you've been paying attention to the weather, the last 10 days were bitterly cold, icy, snowy. So I decided I wanted to escape Boston and go to the natural place to escape cold weather, to Minnesota. So when I told people I was leaving Boston, Minnesota, everyone sort of looked at me a little funny. But I'm thrilled to be here. Actually, it is a little balmy compared to where I just came from. So before I dig into the subject we're going to talk about tonight, I have a video that I'd like to show you. It's just like 1.5 minutes. It's really short. It's a trailer that I produced, that I had produced for this book. And I think it gives like a really nice overview of sort of what we're going to talk about. So let me see if we can figure out a way to get this video playing. In the early days of World War II, before Pearl Harbor pulled America into the fighting, our nation's fleet of cargo ships was tired, most of them relics from the First World War. Great Britain desperately needed more ships and asked America for help. The two nations struck a deal to build 60 British ships. It inspired President Roosevelt to launch his own emergency shipbuilding program. And with the help of the industrialist Henry Kaiser, they would build the Liberty Fleet.
This is a memorable day in the history of American shipbuilding.
These welded steel Liberty ships stretched 441 feet, longer than a football field. But the first ones took half a year to build, far too long.
This whole nation is becoming one great fighting force.
Hundreds of thousands of men and women had to be trained in shipbuilding. And women became the most important shipbuilders. They became known as Wendy the Welder.
We must build more cargo ships, still more cargo ships, until we achieve a launching each day.
The Liberty ship became the symbol of what Americans were capable of when their freedom and democracy were at stake. The fastest Liberty ship was built in 4 days and 15 hours. In 3 years, America built 2,710 Liberty ships. The war would have been lost without them. Okay, I'm glad the sound kicked in right at the end there, so that was great. So I'm gonna tell two stories, two sort of personal stories that I want to start with today. So when you write a book, it's a lot of research. I spent about 5 years researching this story. Both of the stories I'm going to tell you take place around 2023, okay? So the first story, early 2023. I've been researching Liberty ships now, starting during COVID, during the pandemic, in my basement, surrounded by papers, documents, books. I have a bookshelf that's growing. My computer is loaded up with blueprints and newspaper articles and archived papers and hundreds of thousands of documents that I've collected over the course of roughly 3 years of research. I feel like I know everything about a Liberty ship there is to know. I know how long it is. I know how deep it is. I know how big it is and how much they can carry. I know the dimensions. I know everything about it. But up until that point, my research and my idea of a Liberty ship was two-dimensional. I really only had pictures, and I had, I'd even seen videos and clips and stuff like that. But I hadn't experienced a Liberty ship. So there are two Liberty ships floating in the country today. One in San Francisco, the SS Jeremiah O'Brien, and the other one is in Baltimore, the SS John W. Brown. So I decided that I needed to go step and walk and visit and really experience a Liberty ship. So in the summer of 2023, I had to take my son, drop him off in New Jersey at something. I continued down to Baltimore, and I had made arrangements with a guy there at the SS John W. Brown, who was sort of the caretaker of the ship, if you want to think of it that way, and he agreed to sort of give me a private tour. So I drove down to Baltimore, and I have still to this day very vivid memories of sort of the experience. So I remember driving down sort of a neighborhood into a harbor area and down a gravelly road. And then I parked my car and I got out. I sort of turned around and I'm like, whoa, there's the ship right there, right next to me. And the first thing that I was struck by with the Liberty ship wasn't its length. So they're 441 feet long, okay? So 441 feet is about 100 feet longer than a football field. So you can start to picture a football field at 100 feet. Now you get an idea of how long a Liberty ship was. And I walked sort of the length of it on the ground just to experience how long it was. But what I was really struck by was the height and the depth of the Liberty ship. It's about the equivalent of a 10-story building. And that was sort of what struck me when I really looked at it. You can see on the cover of the book, there's numbers on the hull of the ship. Those numbers signify how deep into the water the ship would go when it was loaded with cargo. So the ship that I saw, the John W. Brown ship, was empty, obviously. It's an empty ship. So pretty much all the numbers up to 11 were visible. But when a Liberty ship was loaded with cargo, the highest number on that hull, 30, disappeared in the water. It was just, that's how low in the water the ships would be sinking because of the amount of cargo they held. So I walk up a gangplank onto the ship. I'm met by Dick Stern, retired firefighter, And he takes me into the deck house of the ship. I walk into the deck house. This is where the compasses are, radios are, where the ship is steered from and navigated from. He takes me around to the bunk rooms where the sailors would sleep, and all these different sort of compartments of rooms, the mess hall where the food was served and where they ate. A typical Liberty ship carried a crew of only about 40 people. Not big. That's not what it was meant for. 40, usually about 30 merchant marines and maybe a dozen or so Navy personnel. So that was a Liberty ship from the crew perspective and from the deck house perspective. And I'm going to talk about the deck house a little later. From there, we went into the engine room, saw the engine room briefly. That was sort of interesting. And then from there, he took me down. We went on a winding metal staircase. I feel like I was walking for a while down this staircase, all the way to the bottom. And I could hear clanging. This is like a museum in a way. There's a little gift shop on the floor of the ship. So it's been, restored to a certain degree. Get down to the bottom of the staircase, and we walk to the left, and he takes me, and we walk into a cargo hold. I'm going to show you a diagram of a Liberty ship real quick. So Liberty ship has 5 cargo holds. We walked to cargo hold number 2, okay? So this shows you a diagram of a Liberty ship, pretty detailed. We walk into this cargo hold, and it's empty, first of all. Just a couple of boxes here and there and a ladder. And I was struck when I walked into that cargo hold immediately by how tall it was. It was the first thing that struck me. I looked up, and I was like, whoa, this is a really big space that I'm standing in. And I'm in a ship. A couple of numbers I want to tell you. One Liberty ship, could hold 440 tanks. One Liberty ship. One Liberty ship could hold 2,800 Jeeps, boxed up Jeeps. Or here's one more number for you. We've all been stuck at a crossing, a railroad crossing, when a boxcar train is going past. A 2-mile long boxcar train, the equivalent for one Liberty ship, okay? Now imagine a fleet of almost 3,000 Liberty ships. Now you start to get an idea of just how much cargo that fleet could move. It's a lot, okay? So I'm standing inside this cargo hold. And again, at this point, everything I've done has been two-dimensional. Pictures, videos I've seen, drawings, blueprints, but now here I am. I'm in this cargo hold. This is where it happened. And I was sort of moved in a way to think about the war. I closed my eyes for a minute and I just stood there. And I pictured what was called a whirly crane. They were called giant whirly cranes that would lower a tank into the cargo hold. And I imagined that happening. And I thought, in a lot of ways, this is where the war was won. Nothing will ever diminish, take away from what the military and the troops did during the war. Nothing can ever take away from that. But remember where this war was fought. This war was fought across 2 gigantic oceans, sometimes on the ocean. Our troops around the world, North Africa, Russia, Europe, all over Europe, they needed supplies. They needed tanks, jeeps, boxed up airplanes, munitions, food, medical supplies, tanks, all these things, ambulances, all those things. They needed those things in order to win the war, to fight the war. Those things needed to get to them, and they got to them on board Liberty ships. It was sort of a critical part of the war that I felt like had not been appreciated. So that was, standing in that cargo hold for me was sort of a powerful moment, because I did sort of realize that in many ways this is where the war was won. Without these Liberty ships, our troops can't do what they did. Okay, that's story number 1. Now story number 2. How did these ships get built? Who built them? A big part of my research focused on the men and women who built these ships. But I want to do a little math with you. I started my research in 2020, okay? Let's say that a shipbuilder back in World War II, let's use round numbers, 1940. Let's say a Liberty shipbuilder in 1940 started working and they were 20 years old. And in fact, most of the shipbuilders were not 20, they were even a little older. but let's just say they were 20 years old in 1940. That means they were born in 1920. That means when I started my research in 2020, 100 years old. That was where I started. I'm trying to find people who are probably older than 100 years old to see if I could find someone who worked on a Liberty ship. So I spent a lot of time reading articles of shipbuilders, and I would often come across an article from like 2015 or 2010. And I would see an article about someone who worked in the shipyard. And then I would do some research and try to see if I could find if they were still alive. And inevitably, sadly, I would often find an obituary for them. And I would move on. In the fall of 2023, I read an article in Maine, not far from where I live. The article was about a husband and wife who both worked in the shipyard in Portland, Maine. They were celebrating their 100th birthday. The article was a couple years old. So I read the article, I did a little poking around, and I couldn't seem to find obituaries to match their names. So I decided, what the hell? I found the daughter who was mentioned in this newspaper article, and I sent her an email. Told her who I was, what I was working on, and I said I would love to talk to your parents. She wrote me back the next day. Donna Soma was her name. She said, sadly, her mother had passed away about 6 months ago. But her father was still with us. He's 102 and sharp as a tack. And he would be happy to talk to you about his time building the Liberty ships. And I remember thinking as I read that email, can I come up tonight? We communicated for a couple of weeks. And then we made arrangements. He actually got sick briefly, and I got a little nervous, but he recovered. I took a train up to Portland, Maine, where I met Donna. She took me to her house, and I met Arthur Babineau. So when I tell you that it was a moving experience for me, it really was. Arthur comes downstairs, shakes my hand. He's 102. He's a little hunched over. He shakes my hand, firm as an ox, and we sit down at the kitchen table. As a journalist, I come armed with like 50 questions. I'm ready. I think I asked 2. I literally just sat at the kitchen table with Arthur and I just listened, which is sometimes as a journalist what you want to do. I just listened. He talked and talked and talked, but his stories were tremendous. He had these vivid memories. First of all, he met his wife in the shipyard, and they were only married for 80 years. So that's number one. But he told me so many stories about working in the shipyard. He was 18 when he got the job, paid $35 a week, took a bus down every day to the shipyard, told me a story about how he learned about Pearl Harbor when he was on the bus, the attack of Pearl Harbor. He remembered hearing about it. His job in the shipyard was to inspect the welds on the ship. That was his job. And he managed a team of about 20 people. He told me one particular ship that he inspected, and that had passed inspection and was ready to go. And then he found a faulty weld on the ship. And they had to reopen up the whole front of the ship and fix the weld. And he wondered, what would have happened if I hadn't found that faulty weld? He never knew. So Arthur spoke to me for about 3 hours. It was sort of a very, again, I'm a broken record. It was a very moving experience for me. He was terrific. Shook his hand at the end, took a picture with him. And Donna, she was tremendous to allow me to spend that time with him. He passed away about a year later, maybe 8 months later. And Donna sent me an email. She said that he was sick. He started to have some breathing problems. And she said he woke up once when he was in the hospital, and he recalled the interview. He said he remembered I'd spoken to this guy who wanted to hear my story about working in the shipyard, and I really enjoyed telling him about it. And she was very sort of touched that he remembered it, and that it was part of his legacy, part of his life, and that he was proud that he got to share it with someone. And I was glad. He takes up literally one page in a 400-page book. but it was important for me to include it because it was his legacy, his story. It was a chance for me to share his story with a bigger audience. And so he was a person who helped build Liberty ships. So those are two stories I just wanted to share with you. One about standing on a Liberty ship and the other about the people who built the Liberty ships. So now I just want to go back in time a little bit. How did the Liberty ship come to be? Where did they come from? So you might think that it was actually an American ship design that became the Liberty ship, but in fact it was a British ship design. And I'm not going to pause while I do this, I'm just going to go back. So it was a British ship design. There was a shipbuilder named Robert Cyril Thompson in England who came back. He had designed a cargo ship in England during the war. So you have to remember in 1940, let's say, we are not fighting in the war. This is not our war, this is not our fight. And that's Robert Cyril Thompson on the left there. Great Britain is fighting for its life with Germany. They're deep at war. And the Admiralty in Britain needs cargo ships. They're desperate. They need cargo ships to bring to their troops. They invite Robert Cyril Thompson to come down to London. And they say, we've seen your ship design, we need that ship. We need lots of those ships. But there's a catch. We can't build them. All of our shipyards here are at full capacity. They're all being used to build warships, naval ships, military ships. So we can't build the ship here. We want you to go to our closest ally, who's not yet in the war, to America, and see if America will help build these ships for us. Obviously, Winston Churchill, President Roosevelt, had a very close relationship. Robert Cyril Thompson gets in a boat and comes to America. It takes about 2 weeks. Comes to the United States. He meets with a guy named Emery Scott Land, who is the head of the U.S. Maritime Commission. Emery Land says to Robert Thompson, we are happy to help you build these ships. We want to help you. Except we have the same problem you have back home. All of our shipyards, they're at capacity. We're not just going to turn over one of our shipyards to build your cargo ships. So you can fly around the country and go meet with shipyard owners and go meet with businessmen, and maybe you can identify a place to build these ships, a dormant shipyard. Maybe they'll build you a shipyard, but we can't give you one of our shipyards to build these ships. So Thompson hears that and says, okay. So he gets on, he charters a plane and flies 17,000 miles in 3 weeks around the country. Tacoma, Seattle, Los Angeles, Houston, New Orleans, North Carolina, all over, meeting with businessmen, meeting with shipyard owners, all these different people. He sort of doesn't really make a lot of progress, but he meets one guy. In Tacoma, near Seattle. He's impressed with him. This guy says to him, I'll build you 200 ships. Thompson only needed 60. He was only asking for 60 ships. And this guy says, I'll build you 200 ships. And Thompson doesn't really understand who this guy is. He's not a shipbuilder by nature. He's not an engineer. He's just a businessman. He's sort of overweight, bald, roly-poly, glasses. Doesn't really know who this guy is. But he seems really cocky, really arrogant. He's telling me he's going to build me 200 ships. Goes back to Washington. He meets again with the Maritime Commission. He tells them about his trip. And he says, I met this one guy in Tacoma who seemed really confident that he could build me 200 ships. And the guy in Washington says, oh, you know who you met with? That's Henry Kaiser. Henry Kaiser has a contract with us. He's building 5 ships for us right now. His first 5 ships. He's never built a ship in his life. These are his first 5 ships he's building. And I got to tell you, the contract is going very well. Ships are on time, they're under budget, coming together fast. We've been impressed with the work. And he said, you know, he might actually be a good partner for you. So now Thompson's like, okay, goes back to Tacoma and Seattle. And Henry Kaiser's meeting him, and he's going to take him down to San Francisco. They go down to San Francisco, just across the bay, and Henry Kaiser brings him to a mud flat, a vacant, vast mud flat on San Francisco Bay in Richmond, California. He sort of waves his hand to Robert Thompson and says, here's your shipyard. Kaiser sort of looking and says, where is my shipyard? Kaiser says, I need you to imagine it. I'm going to build you a shipyard right here. and we're going to build your ships right here. Okay, Thompson's in a pickle. He's been told by the British Admiralty to go over to the United States, build 60 ships, and hurry. All he's got on the table is one guy with an offer to build him a bunch of ships at a mudflat that doesn't exist where a shipyard is supposed to be one day. This guy has never completed a ship in his life. He's building 5 ships, but he's never completed a ship in his life. This is the best offer he's got. Comes back to Washington and basically says, I don't have a choice. This is it. I got to work with Henry Kaiser. They strike a deal. And the deal is we're going to build 60 ships, 30 on the West Coast, 30 on the East Coast. They wanted ships on the East Coast because it was important for all the legacy shipbuilders on the East Coast. It was important that they get some of the business. Didn't want to build them all on the West Coast. So they have to find a partner on the East Coast. But Kaiser's going to build the 30 on the West Coast. Thompson, realizing that this whole plan sounds cockamamie, he sent a telegram to his people back in London, the Admiralty, and says, I've got a deal, but he realizes he can't give them the details by cable. He's got to go back home and tell them. Part of the reason he's concerned is because he was given a certain amount of money that he could spend when he came over, but that was just to build ships. Now he's realizing I'm not just building ships, I'm building shipyards. And I've got to hire employees to build these ships. I got to create a workforce. This is a whole different ballgame than what I was contracted to do. So he gets in a boat to come back to London. His boat gets torpedoed halfway home. He's thrown into the water with the crew and the other people on board. They're rescued, they're picked up, and they eventually make it back to London. His wife had been listening on the radio, and she heard about a ship that was torpedoed, and she wondered if her husband was gone. She didn't know. No internet back in 1940. So, gets back to London, explains the detail, and they all agree, this sounds good, let's go. That's the beginning of the Liberty Ship program, because those ships that get built for London are called the Ocean-class ships. We build 60 of those Ocean-class ships for London. Those ships would become the Liberty ship. That's the beginning. That design that Robert Thompson brought over to America becomes the Liberty ship. So let me tell you really briefly about Henry Kaiser. Henry Kaiser, born in 1882, upstate New York, 50 miles from where FDR was born. They're born 1882, both of them, and they don't meet for 60 years. Henry Kaiser moves out after growing up in upstate New York, eventually settles in the Pacific Northwest. He becomes a contractor, a builder of things, builds roads, bridges, and in 1930, the United States government puts out a contract. Depression has just happened. Depression is like a year ago. The country's in a tailspin. The United States government's going to build the biggest public works project in its history. Any idea what that is, 1930? Hoover Dam, called the Boulder Dam at the time. They're going to build the Boulder Dam. Henry Kaiser gets wind of this project and decides, I want to bid for this project. Puts together a team of contractors and builders, big names in the industry, and their bid wins the Hoover Dam, the Boulder Dam project. Henry Kaiser goes from being sort of a Pacific Northwest contractor and not really well known. Now he's got the biggest public works project in American history. He completes the Boulder Dam 2 years ahead of schedule and under budget. It's supposed to be finished in 1938. He finishes in late 1935. When it's finished, FDR, President Roosevelt, comes out for the celebration and the opening of the dam. And he can't help but be impressed. How did this thing get built so quickly, under budget, ahead of schedule? Who did this? That's the introduction for Henry Kaiser and FDR. It would be a beautiful marriage. The two of them realize over a couple of years that they can help each other. FDR, President of the United States during the Depression era, is trying to build back an economy. He needs to create jobs, needs to get things done. He needs someone who's good at building things and can get things done. Well, that's Henry Kaiser. Henry Kaiser, his entire livelihood depends on government contracts, winning government contracts. Knowing the President of the United States is a pretty good friend. So they both realize they can help each other. When the United States gets involved in the war, as I said before, that's when FDR eventually decides he's going to build his own slew of cargo ships. I'm just peeking at my notes here for a minute. Shortly after America starts building the ocean ships for Great Britain, FDR announces we're going to build our own cargo ships using the same design. 200 of them, we're going to start. One of the decisions that FDR made, which is one of the most important decisions, he was being pressured by his people to build a different ship, not that ship. That ship had so many things wrong with it. It was slow, 11 knots at best. It was hulking, it was ugly, it was not an attractive, pretty, beautiful, fast ship. Nothing about it was great. FDR looked at it and said, you know, you're right. It is not the best ship, the prettiest ship, the biggest ship, the fastest ship. It's none of those things. But you know what it is? It's a simple ship. And right now, what I need is I need a lot of ships. And I need them really fast. We need to essentially, and this was sort of his motto, we need to build ships faster than the Germans can sink them. That was the goal. We were already losing ships to Germany, even though we weren't even at war yet. Germany was already sinking ships. FDR realizes we just need to build ships fast. And he tells his advisors and his senior people, I understand what you're saying. I understand you want to build a ship that's going to last for generations and that's going to be something that we can be so proud of, but that's not what we need right now. Right now, we just need a lot of ships. And this ship solves that problem. It became nicknamed the Ugly Duckling for a reason. It was not an attractive ship, but it could be replicated very quickly. So, the speed of the ship, how quickly it could be built. Roosevelt, the first Liberty ship took about 6 to 8 months to build. That's how long it took at the beginning of the program. By the end of 1941, just after Pearl Harbor, America has completed 1 Liberty ship. Okay? That's how many we built. Very quickly, production starts to get better because the workforce starts to build up. Shipyards are ramping up production. They're figuring it out. They're getting better at it. Eventually, we start to get that production down to 3 months, 2 months, and 1 month, the average time. So Kaiser's really figuring out how to build Liberty ships faster. One of the things he did, which was very innovative, is he wanted to know how Henry Ford had figured out a way to build 40,000 vehicles a month. How was Ford doing that, pumping out 40,000 vehicles a month? He sends one of his workers up to Detroit to study it. And what they learn was that Ford has perfected the assembly line. The assembly line is the key to Ford's manufacturing process, right? Worker comes back to Henry Kaiser and says, here's how they're building those cars so quickly. Okay, so Kaiser's people look at the assembly line and they're like, well, it's one thing to roll a 15-foot vehicle down an assembly line. Another thing to roll a 441-foot ship down an assembly line. That doesn't quite translate. That doesn't work the same way, right? But he has an idea. Maybe instead of having the ship come to the workers, what we need to do is figure out a way to create and build pieces of the ship in different places so that more people could be working on the ship at the same time. Everybody's opened up a box of Legos at some point in time, right? Maybe you've given a gift Lego box. When you open up that box, let's say you're building a toy boat, as an example. You open up the box, there might be 3 plastic bags of Legos in that box. One for one part of the boat, another for another part of the boat, and another for the other part of the boat. Now, what if you took each of those bags and gave them to a group of kids and said, you build just this bag, and you build just this bag, and you guys build just this bag? All of a sudden, those 3 components of the ship get built really quickly, right? We're not just building all the parts together. Now we're building these 3 separate bags together. And then when they're done, we're just going to snap the boat together and we're done. Just like that. That's sort of what Henry Kaiser did. At his shipyard, he created these different stations where different parts of the ship could be built. For example, the deck house. Deck house was a 3-story building, 210 tons. That's a big thing. But if they had to wait to build the deck house for the whole ship to be done on the shipway and then to sort of build the deck house on top of the deck, that would be really time consuming, right? But now what if you have a warehouse, let's say a mile away from there, and their only job there is to build the deck house? That's it. Well, two things are going to happen. Number one, they're going to get really good at it because that's the only thing they're doing. They're going to get fast. They're going to figure out how to keep going faster and faster and faster and build this deck house faster. And the other thing is they can build lots of them. They can build 10 deck houses at once and bring them out when the ships are ready. And that's what they did. So the deck house would come out in like 3 or 4 pieces. And it would just be brought out, and giant cranes and carts would bring it out. They would hoist up like 3 pieces of the deck house, plop, 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 put the roof on, done. That allowed the manufacturing process, it was called prefabrication, to really speed up. It was a dramatic change in the shipbuilding process that happened. So, the time for building Liberty ships. I said before that it was about a month they got the time down to. Henry Kaiser, if he was one thing, was really good at marketing. And he recognized that America, despite the importance of the Liberty Ship program, and he knew it was very, very important to him, he recognized that no one was really paying attention to the Liberty Ship program. It was a great thing that we were doing. Hundreds of thousands of men and women from around the country had flocked to these shipyards. Women were now working alongside men as welders. Wendy the welder, they were called, just like Rosie the riveter. They were welding these ships together, and they were great at it. The women were better welders than the men, in fact. They were so good at it because welding required a certain type of dexterity and strength and sort of flexibility to get into these tight corners that men couldn't reach. So women were terrific at welding. They had welding competitions to see who could be the fastest welder. They were invited to the White House to meet with Eleanor Roosevelt. So they were really important. So Henry Kaiser was excited about everything that was happening, but the country wasn't really excited. And we're at war. So he decides, maybe there's something we could do. How do we get people excited about the Liberty Ship? What if we created a competition? He tells 2 of his shipyards, and by now he's got a number of shipyards, most in the Pacific Northwest. His son is running the one in Portland, Oregon. And one of his longtime workers is running the one in Richmond, California, that first one I talked about. In the fall of 1942, he tells these 2 shipyard owners, shipyard managers, you're officially in competition with each other. Who can build the fastest Liberty ship? Ready, set, go. It's almost like an Olympic competition. He knew that the workers were taking great pride in what they were doing. The workers really enjoyed what they were doing. It was patriotic. They felt like they were contributing. So he had a feeling and a hunch that this competition would be successful. So what happened? Portland, Oregon went first. And they built in August of 1942, August 27th, 1942. They launched the SS Pierre DuPont. They finished it in 26 days. That was the fastest ship yet. 26 days. A couple weeks later, Richmond, California went. And they launched the SS John Fitch in 24 days. Knocked off 2 days from that. Portland said, we can beat that. And in the fall of 1942, they launched the SS Joseph Teal in 10 days. When they did that, they were so sure that 10 days was not going to be beaten. They invited the president to come out, and he launched the SS Joseph Teal with his daughter. It was a big celebration. It was covered in the newspapers. It was a big deal. When Richmond got wind of that 10-day ship, they said, hang on a minute. All the workers in Richmond put together ideas. They were invited to essentially collect ideas. How can we shave an hour here, 3 hours here, 20 minutes here? What can we do to beat 10 days? When Henry Kaiser got wind of the fact that this shipyard in Richmond was going to try to beat the 10-day ship, he got nervous. He got nervous because the president had just come out and launched a 10-day ship, been celebrated. He was on the cover of Life magazine. It was a big deal. And now all of a sudden they're going to launch a faster ship. He was worried that it might sort of embarrass the president or sort of like upstage him. That big thing that you just launched and celebrated and we're on the cover of Life, it doesn't matter anymore. So he called the White House, or he had someone call the White House and essentially asked the president, are you okay with this? If we can build the ship faster than 10 days. Someone checked with the president, and the response was, tell HJ, Henry J. Kaiser, if he can build a ship in 1 day, go ahead. FDR did not have the time for worrying about egos and worrying about squabbles and worrying about all that stuff. He was not worried about that. He wanted his ships. So, on November 7th, 1942, 1,000 workers all gathered in Richmond, California. Think of it like a football play, like lining up for a play. When the quarterback yells, hut, hut, hike, everybody goes to their respective roles. At midnight, November 7, 1942, a whistle blew. Everyone took off, ran to their respective roles and positions. They worked around the clock in 8-hour shifts for 4 straight days. Didn't stop. And in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes, they launched the SS Robert E. Peary. It was a remarkable achievement. 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes, they launched the SS Robert E. Peary. And the first question I often get asked is, did it float? It floated just fine. And not only did it float, but it served throughout the war. It was at the beaches in Normandy. It had a remarkable life and a remarkable career. The SS Robert E. Peary really is sort of a testament to what Americans were capable of. The plan was never to repeat that. We weren't going to build more 4-day ships. That was it. It was a stunt. The next day, guess what? Every newspaper in the country writing about Liberty ships. Kaiser's shipyard launches 4-day ship, headlines all around the country. People were talking about Liberty ships. People were talking about boring, steel, hulking, slow cargo ships because Henry Kaiser just had this idea. It was a marketing stunt. It was nothing more than that, but it worked. It was effective. So that's briefly the story of the Liberty ship I just wanted to tell you. A couple other little things I'm just going to mention. I talked about women. Women really were critical in the war, in the building of these ships. There's Kaiser and FDR at launching of a ship. I mentioned Portland, Maine. This is Pete Newell. He ran the Portland, Maine shipyard. Graduate of MIT, engineer. He was a big shipbuilder on the East Coast. When the Maritime Commission went looking for a partner on the East Coast to build this 30 ships there, they came to Pete Newell and he wooed them with a New England clam bake. Well, the big New England clam bake at his property, and that was how he sold them, that he could be the one to build those ships. So here's a picture of the Richmond, California shipyard. You can see how sprawling it was. It's really big. You can see in the far right, I think I have a pointer here. There we go. Whoops. Let me go back. This is where, that's the ships where there were about 11 bays where the Liberty ships were launched from. When a Liberty ship launched, there was a big ceremony, that didn't mean it went off into the war. That simply meant that it went to be outfitted. The second the ship was essentially ready to float and good to go, they shipped it about 50 feet down to be finished. Plumbing, electricity, final touches with painting, little things like that. That would be sort of the final touches they would do. But they got it out of the shipway so they could start another ship. The second a ship launched out of the shipway, a new keel was placed, like in minutes. So I talked about ships were not just built on the East and West Coast. Inland shipyards with access to rivers and oceans were critical. Here we are in Minnesota. Port Cargill, we talked about that. I know that some of you are very familiar with it, of course. No Liberty ships were built here. They built 22 ships here. They had to, as many of you probably know, they had to dredge the Mississippi so that some of these ships could go down the Mississippi to New Orleans. I didn't know a lot about this during my research, but for the last couple of weeks I've been researching and I've been fascinated to learn what I have learned about the shipbuilding operation here. The first ship, the USS Agawam, was laid down in 1942 and sailed down the Mississippi to New Orleans, was launched into battle in May of 43. And ships that were built at Cargill went on to have long and active services. The USS Kishwaukee, active all the way into the 70s, bringing fuel, weapons, and ammunition to troops fighting in other wars. So women building Liberty ships, they were critical. It was really a remarkable moment in history. Men, for the most part, had dominated the shipyard industry. But during World War II, all the men were off fighting in the war, and the women were critical. And it wasn't easy at first. A lot of the men didn't like working next to the women. They struggled with it. But the shipyard owners and the shipyard managers, they were like, get over it. The women are here. We need them. And they played a critical role in the shipbuilding. I showed you the illustration. This is just what a ship looked like as it was coming together. You can see the huge deck. You can see the scaffolding on the left. It was a massive operation. The race I mentioned, that's the Peary on the right, the 4-day ship. It was a really big deal. So that's a brief overview of the Liberty ship. Obviously, there's so much more, but that's sort of a brief overview of what I wanted to talk about. At the end, we'll take questions, right? We're not doing questions now, is that right? Questions later? Is that right? Okay. So do questions in a little bit. Save your questions, write them down, text a message to yourself. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I hope that gives you a little bit of insight into this really important, really what I felt like was an underappreciated part of the war. That's why I wanted to write the book. I felt like it was just a story that not a lot of people appreciated how important these cargo ships were to the war. And as I said, I'm firmly believing that we don't win the war without the Liberty ships. They were that important. So thank you for the time. I appreciate it. Look forward to hearing your questions a little bit.
Nicely done.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yep. Thank you, Doug. Yeah. Thank you, Doug. So Liberty ships, there you go. I think there were 2,700 built and about 300.
2,710 built in about 3 years.
In about 3 years, and about 300 sank during.
that?
How many were sunk by enemy
About
action?
200 to 300 were lost during the war, yeah.
Yeah. So 1 in 10 were actually succumbed to battle. Quite interesting. This is FDR was his number 4 priority was cargo ships. Amazingly enough, so FDR had it going on. He was a smart guy. Going to the next segment of the program, Doug mentioned Port Cargill, which is just right over here somewhere, and building ships, 6 of them, and then contracted up to be 22 of them. So something I didn't know. I want to introduce someone who's in charge of that current day. Will Williams is here. He's a Savage resident all his life. He's a graduate from Burnsville High School in Minnesota, frequent participant in the high school football tournament. He is a BS graduate from Winona State University and also a master's from the University of St. Thomas. He taught math 35 years in Harding High School right here in St. Paul. He's a member of the Twin Cities Civil War Roundtable and is married to the lovely Miss Janet in front here for a few years now. So, Will, why don't you come on up and tell us about the experiences of Cargill and the Dan Patch Society out of Savage, Minnesota. Will Williams.
Thank you for the introduction and the opportunity to share our history. Dan Patch Historical Society in Savage, Minnesota was organized in 1992. Our mission includes the history of Savage and the city, Savage during World War II, and it was a classified military secret that Savage housed the Japanese soldiers' language military intelligence school called Camp Savage. Also in World War II, it was not only Camp Savage, which was critically important. Cargill built ships. I was young, of course. I wasn't fighting in the war or anything like that. I saw the soldiers around town, the Japanese Americans, and from the language thing, and I knew something was going on at Cargill, because there are a lot of people working there, about 3,000 every day. What they did was they built 18 of these tankers, we'll call them, and also 4 tugs for the Army Corps of Engineers at Savage. They mentioned of women working there. Was over 3,000 people went to work there every day. They didn't quit at night or anything. They just kept working. And the Corps of Engineers dredged the Minnesota River up from St. Paul. It's 14 miles. The average depth at that point was 3.5 feet. Cargill Company was very familiar with boats, mainly river boats. They located their plants around the country, usually by a river. But they also had plants on the coast, the East Coast especially, in Albany and New York. But Cargill built these ships, and they named all of them after indigenous names for rivers. Okay, that's one of them right there, the Agawam. And it's the first tanker to be built, and it's going under the Mendota Bridge from the Minnesota River to the Mississippi River in November of '41. There is a map on the left there about the installation area for the boats. And they were buying this land up already in '42, so and they didn't start till '43. There is a shot of the employees, and 3,500 is about what they employed. The Twin Cities area had plenty of skilled people, and what they would do is they didn't all live in Savage. We probably were just a few hundred at that point, and a lot of them came from the other suburbs joining us, Bloomington and Prior Lake and Shakopee, the Twin Cities, because they could run train out or bus them out and to work there. Okay, that's a picture of Port Cargill Works manager's dinner for the lead men and the foreman. Carl Paulman of the National Foremen's Institute was a speaker, and that was August '43, the Curtis Hotel in downtown Minneapolis. And some Navy guys there also. The Navy controlled it. I'm about done.
You did a great job.
No.
Great. Questions? Go ahead. One over there.
Were there problems early on with the welds on those ships?
The question is, were there problems early on the weld on the ships?
Not early on. The problems with the welding developed a little later. It was obviously a huge decision to switch from riveting to welding. That was a big decision for the Maritime Commission to make. Up until that point, ships have been riveted together. And there were a couple of factors for why welding was viewed as a smarter, better way to do it. First of all, it saved at a time when steel was a really valuable commodity. Welding required less steel because you didn't have to overlap. Two pieces of steel could be welded together like this, as opposed to 2 pieces of riveting steel needed to go together like this. So there was a saving of steel. And also, riveting required sort of a team of people to work together to rivet 2 pieces together, whereas welding could be done individually. So at the beginning, the welding was, it worked and it was fine. There were very little issues with it. There were a few issues with some substandard steel. That was one of the problems. But later in the war, late '43, early '44, some cracks started to develop in some ships. Not a lot of them, but some ships. There was a famous incident that happened with a ship that was not a Liberty ship, but it was a welded together ship called the Schenectady, the SS Schenectady. And while it was sitting in port on the East Coast, the ship was sitting in port at like 2 in the morning, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the ship just went like this. Just cracked in 2. The picture of it's phenomenal. You can see 2 ends of the ship pointing up at the sky. that was sort of a pivotal moment when they realized we might need to take a look at the welding. So they did, and what they did was they made some modifications to the Liberty ship design. The ships were slightly tweaked, a little bigger, and a different engine was put on them, and the modifications became known as the Victory ship. And they built about 400 Victory ships on top of the 2,710 Liberty ships. So Victory ship sort of became the, if you want to think of it like as a second cousin of the Liberty ship, that's sort of what it was. If you put them next to each other, you really couldn't tell the difference. They looked almost identical. Other questions?
Yeah, quality author, a 5-second question and a 5-minute answer. Well
Okay,
done.
got it.
Over here.
This is for the Port Cargill. Where was the port located relative to the 35W bridge over 94, over the Minnesota River? Was it downstream?
The bridges?
No. The location of the shipyard.
The shipyard.
Oh, the shipyard. Where was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, if you go into Savage on Highway 13, you'll see the elevators that were the originals, and then you keep going on 13, you go under the railroad, the M&S Railroad, Dan Patch Railroad, and there are some more silos there. That's Cargill West now. They bought out a couple companies that went in there. So they pretty much control the grain going out of Savage, to which amounts to approximately 6 to 9% of the grain in the country going out. And they're really busy now with the Ukraine war. And also they've been busy since the Panama Canal was widened and redone so the big transports can get through there. And that affected us in Savage as far as ports of Savage.
This is a question for Doug. Here. You
there.
talked about a ship that was 10 stories tall.
Yeah.
Was the cargo bay a series of decks, or how did you stack equipment, trucks, tanks, etc. in? And the reason I ask is when I read my father's notes, it talked about landing in Le Havre and dispersing to small towns where it took them a month to put their equipment together before they headed to the front line. So that indicates, I think one of your slides said planes were shipped in parts.
Yeah, so
were trucks and tanks and artillery shipped in parts?
Yep. So planes, for example, were boxed up. Smaller planes were boxed up and shipped over on the Liberty ships. The cargo, there were 5 cargo holds, and the stuff would the cargo would just be lowered in with these gigantic cranes that were capable of lifting things that were 30 tons, you know, and they would be stacked as high as possible inside the cargo holds. And then every inch of the ship was used. So not only were the cargo holds filled, but then the deck of the ship was also used to stack on top of the deck. That's why these ships had such a small crew. There was very little room to navigate, you know, on the ship. Once it was loaded, you couldn't navigate on the deck of the ship because cargo was on top of the deck. So every inch of the ship was really used for the cargo. And occasionally, like I said, it was even a PT boat was put on top of the deck. So, yeah.
My dad was in an armored unit.
Yeah.
So I'm visually trying to think of Sherman's tanks stacked on top of each other.
They were in boxes. They were in boxes. Yep. Other questions?
Along the same line, sort of, the first boats they built in Savage, they, didn't power them up till they got them down to Galveston or New Orleans, somewhere down there. Then they decided, well, this is a little ridiculous, we'll power them up here. And so they started doing that, and they could make them quicker, of course. So they'd send them down and they'd power them up down there. And they were good to go. And also the life of that, I just got a couple things. You mentioned Vietnam and Korea, and the ships that they built in Savage, a couple of them were, well, they used them in Vietnam, they go up the river, Mekong. And also, they're all decommissioned now. The last one decommissioned, I think, was in Brazil doing something, and they're all gone now.
Next question up here in the back.
Where did most of the raw materials come from and the manufacturing? Was that done in Pennsylvania or was it done on both coasts?
Say that one more time. Where did
The raw materials for all these ships, like
Yeah.
where did all that come from? Because, today we import from all over the world.
Yeah.
And where did the manufacturing, well, more importantly, because we didn't have factories that would make that kind of material in such bulk quantities to be able to even build a ship that quickly.
Right, so I didn't get into it too much. So there was a huge supply chain that was created across the country for all of these ships. The engines were built in Indiana. They were different parts of the ship were built in different places. The steel came from all over the country. One of the things that was really important in building the Liberty ships was the fact that they were built in 9 different shipyards around the country. So they were not just built at Kaiser shipyards on the West Coast, they were built all around the country. And what was so important to that process was essentially the blueprint, the design of the ship was given to each shipyard, and they were told clearly, you have to build this exact ship with these exact parts and these exact tools and the exact same way. So it had to be really like a cookie cutter, because they needed, if a ship was built in Richmond, California, and it needed a repair in Baltimore, Maryland, they needed to be able to make the repair very easily. So it was really important that the supply chain was critical to the process of building these ships, because they just needed to have all the shipyards stacked with supplies to repair, build, do all the things that were necessary. So everywhere around, there were places around the country that were creating different smaller components for these ships. It was really just a massive effort.
I can imagine. Question down here, Don.
How many shipyards were there?
There were 9 in total that were building Liberty ships.
But how many total were building? I had family that worked in Orleans, Texas.
Yeah.
And in Beaumont, Texas.
Oh, yeah, no. So I'm just talking about Liberty ships. So in terms of the number of shipyards in total around the country, it was dozens. I mean, there were multiple shipyards around the country beyond the ones just building Liberty ships. And of course, the shipyards building Liberty ships were building other ships too. They weren't just building Liberty ships. Henry Kaiser's shipyards built tankers and built naval vessels and other things as well. So they didn't just build Liberty ships. So there were dozens of shipyards around the country, but 9 particular ones that were building the Liberty ships.
And Kaiser had 2 of those?
Kaiser had 4. Kaiser had 4 shipyards. Yeah.
Okay, one last question. Where is it?
I was in the Army in the mid-70s. I was in the Transportation Corps down at Port of New Orleans. And we were loading the last of the Liberty ships over to Vietnam and to Bremerhaven, Germany. And when they would come back to New Orleans with retrograde cargo, we'd send that to wherever it was going. And then oftentimes we would retire those ships. They would either go to a scrapyard or they'd go to the James River, the Sweetwater port in the James River in southeast Virginia. So I can say I worked on Liberty ships.
Thank you.
Thank
you very much.
I want to give this dude right in front a question. He had a question. Go ahead.
Go ahead, yep.
I know that there were 2 Liberty ships that were converted into aircraft carriers, right?
I believe that's right. You might stump me there, but I believe I read that myself.
Yeah, the question is, how many Liberty ships were converted into aircraft carriers?
I believe you're right. I believe it's 2. It was not a common thing. It was a difficult conversion process. First of all, remember what I said before. The Liberty ships were not long. They were not super long. So converting them into different kind of ships was tricky. So that's why it didn't happen very often. Liberty ship was designed for this one purpose, and that was really it. And that's why they sort of were not really functional as other kind of boats.
So little Josh, why don't you and I team up on that answer, okay? After this. Great. All right, well, thank you, Doug Most and Will Williams. Thank you for another great
Thank you.
session.
Support for this program is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you. Additional support is made possible by the Catherine B. Anderson Fund of the St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation. Upcoming roundtable topics can be found at www.mn-ww2roundtable.org. Production services provided by